What's going on, guys? Welcome back to DCS World. Welcome back aboard the Hornet for another tutorial video. In this one, we're going to attempt to tackle the arduous task of going over the basics, and I do mean basics, of the Hornet's Datalink, IFF identification friend or foe, and situational awareness SA pages. Now, that's a lot to break down, so let's start with the basics of IFF. So for this portion, we're going to zoom in here on our radar page as well as our UFC. For IFF to function, we need to make sure that our IFF system is on. So during the normal startup procedure, this should be turned on. But in case if it's not, hit the push button labeled IFF. If you don't see on here, just press and hold the on-off button until you see on. Now, for IFF, what is IFF? It stands for Identification Friend or Foe, and it is a system by which we can identify radar contacts as either friendly or hostile, or in some cases unknown. Now, as you can see on my radar screen here, between 30 and 40 miles out, I have a bunch of radar contacts. There are some hostiles and some friendlies mixed in here. If we move around our TDC and we want to hover over one of these contacts, you might notice that contact changed from yellow to red, and it went from a square to a sort of an inverted chevron there, or a half triangle. This particular contact came back as a hostile. Now, let's see if we can find a friendly. This guy, I think. Yep, he's a friendly. He's come back with a half circle. Now, you might be wondering what all these symbols mean. These symbols are part of an identification system called HAFU, H-A-F-U, which the letters stand for hostile, ambiguous, friendly, and unknown. And on your screen here in a moment, you should see a quick little breakdown of what all of these symbols mean. For most of your purposes and in a lot of your gameplay, you're going to want to look for the chevron, or the inverted triangle, is going to mean hostile. A square, normally a yellow square in the Hornet, is going to be an unknown contact, so that's a contact we don't know is friendly or hostile or what they are. And the green half circle, such as this one here on my radar, is a friendly. Now, how do we actually identify these things as hostile or friendly? Well, there's a few different ways. Normally, when we go to manually IFF, and for manual IFF, all we really need to do is make sure our IFF system is on. We need to just hover over a contact and then do sensor select depress, and that will trigger the manual IFF functions. And what that's actually doing is it's actually sending out a transponder signal to that particular aircraft along the wavelength of our radar beam to interrogate that target. Now, if it comes back with a positive a positive interrogation, such as from one of these friendly contacts here, if I can get him to show up. He's there for a second, but you can see it. Their mode 4 transponder is actually sending back a signal saying, hey, I'm a good guy, don't shoot me. So my system interrogates and sees that and says, okay, this is a good guy, don't shoot him. On the other hand, for this hostile contact, it sends out a signal to try to interrogate its transponder for a positive IFF signal, and it gets no return at all. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that negative return is not enough to actually mark this target as a hostile. For the IFF system to actually mark a target as a hostile, and thus a valid target that we can shoot down, the system needs two sources to confirm that the target is a hostile. So one such source is a negative return on the IFF contact. Another such source could be an off-board donor aircraft, such as an AWACS, that's using its own radar and can provide donor information that could say, hey, this target is a hostile. I concur with your thought that this target is a hostile. That counts as your two sources. We can also use a system that's built into the Hornet's radar called NCTR. We have a setting in the radar here called NCTR. This stands for non-conforming or non-cooperative target recognition. And what this means is if we had a target that was coming back unknown and we didn't have another off-board source of IFF data to confirm that this target was a hostile, what we could do is lock this target up in a single target track, and then we can mash the sensor select depress button a few times. And what NCTR is doing in this case is it's using the radar beam that we have to actually look inside the engine intakes of that target. That sounds a little bit weird, but that is exactly what it's doing, and it's looking to get a sort of radar return photograph of the engine blades and fan blades inside the engine intakes to determine what sort of aircraft it is. And based on coalition rules in the mission, let's say you know for a fact that a MiG-29 is going to be a hostile always because there's no MiG-29s on your team. If NCTR detects a MiG-29, it's going to say, hey, that's a hostile. And it can combine that with your other information sources to set the requisite two sources, and then that can count as a positive ID of a hostile contact. As far as IFF goes, that's pretty much the basics of it. You can get a little bit more into the weeds of IFF as well, but for most purposes, that really will be all you need in terms of IFF. However, that's not where we're going to stop today in terms of IFF, because IFF leads into the data link. So let's zoom out a little bit here. Back to the UFC, we want to make sure our data link is turned on. The Hornet is equipped with a Link16 radio data link that can interface with other aircraft, and it can interface with AWACS. In fact, that's where we get our off-board sources from, is through the data link. We want to make sure that's on, and through normal startup procedures, the data link should always be on. If it's not, once again, just press and hold the on-off button until you see data link on. Now, the primary benefit of using the data link is that, again, I mentioned, we can get information from other sources other than our own aircraft. So that could be other fighters, that could be AWACS, that could be ships, such as an aircraft carrier that's on our side and using its big old radar to scan the area. Basically anything else that can provide data to aircraft in the air can come through our data link to give us more situational awareness. Now, that leads straight into discussion about the SA page. So if I look down here at my AMPCD, and I'm going to just halt the camera there, what we're looking at here is the Situational Awareness page, or SA page for short. Now this thing can do a lot, so let's try to break it down. And we're going to stick to mostly just the basics and stuff that you might need. You might notice right away that we already see similar HAFU symbology that we saw on the radar. The SA page imprints what our radar currently sees onto it for a 360-degree view of our current battlefield. And we've got a few symbols that we can look at here. So those hostiles that I mentioned are here with these diamonds. Okay. And these circles here are friendlies that we know of. Along the top here, we actually are embedding radar warning receiver contacts as well. So the actual radar emissions from those MiG-29s out in front of us. And all of this is the familiar HAFU symbology like we saw on the radar. Now, one thing to keep in mind is HAFUs on the SA page and the radar have a top half and a bottom half. The bottom half of the HAFU is effectively what we see from our aircraft. The top half of the HAFU is what is being donated to us. So, for example, you see that the bottom half of this particular contact here is actually fading away, and now we only see the top half. This means that we don't actually see this contact, but another aircraft on our data link actually does, so it's donating that information to us. Same thing with some of these other contacts here. If it is a full diamond or a full square or a full circle, that means both we see it and our data link donors also see it. So it just aims to give us the best situational awareness possible because we can see the battlefield from effectively multiple angles here. Anyway, we'll come back to this in a little bit as we look at some of the symbology a little bit more deeply. Let's just look at some of the options that we have for the SA page here. So let's start along the top. We have map. If you have the SA page up on the AMPCD, you can toggle the moving map similarly to the HSI. Just because it's so blinding, I tend to turn it off. You can have the SA page on any one of the DDIs as well, if you like. We have some declutter options here. If we open this up, we can turn off the compass rose, turn off some more symbology. M-Reject 1 allows us to turn off SAM site rings, and one thing I can't actually show you right now is that if there are known enemy SAM sites in the opposing coalition as part of the mission planning, you'll actually see the engagement rings of the SAM site. So for example, right around here where I'm drawing a circle with my mouse, there might be a range ring for something like an SA-6, if one such did exist down there. And M-Reject 2 could turn more of that off as well. We're going to turn off all of the rejection modes and go back to the main menu here. Got a scale button. Similarly to the radar and the HSI, we can change the scale of what we see down to 5 miles and as far out. And in fact, there we go. If I zoom out to 160, there's actually an SA-10 range ring way out in the distance there, about 160 miles that way. So that's what that looks like. Let's bring this back to 40. MK2 doesn't do anything. We have decenter options. So right now the display is set so that we have a 360 degree view, centralized view around our aircraft. We can decenter the option here, and now we only have a frontal view. So we're seeing out to about 80 miles directly in front of us as opposed to 40 miles in every direction. And you can toggle that on and off as you wish and change the ranges as well. We can also manipulate our waypoints from this page. What a lot of folks will do is they will use the SA page effectively as their primary piece of navigation, and you can do that. So you can select and toggle your waypoints here. Actually, just going to select that to waypoint 2 for now because we're going to come back to that. We can also do waypoint designate and sequencing and auto as well as a number of other things. Let's go over to the left side here and look at the sensor button. Now, the sensor button gives us options for what sensors are actually contributing to the SA page. So we have a few crossed out options on the side here. Link 4 is an option that's currently not implemented. It just sort of magically works right now. Link 4 is an older version of Datalink as compared to Link16. So for example, something like the F-14 Tomcat uses Link 4 Datalink technology, and the Hornet is effectively backwards compatible with it. I do believe it does need translation through something like an AWACS, but in using this function here, which we can't actually toggle on or off right now, we can get contacts from Link 4 sources as well as Link16. The IFF button here does nothing for the moment. The RWR options enables us to turn on and off that RWR symbology that we saw. Friend off, we can show friendly RWR filtering contacts on the SA page as well. That's usually left for off. And we can turn on and off the display of unknown contacts, so it will only show hostiles, known hostiles, and known friendlies if we were to turn this off. SA page returns to the main SA page, as you can see. Let's go back into sensor for a moment. OCS1 and OCS2 are for different types of not yet implemented countermeasures, so we're not going to worry about that just yet. FF, F/F stands for fighter to fighter. Now this is the option that toggles data link information from other fighters. So fighters that can directly contribute SA page information to us, we can toggle that information on or off here. PPLI stands for Precise Participant Location and Identification. This is essentially the setting that enables the data link to actually process the data for the other track files. Surveillance, SURV here, serve stands for surveillance. If we turn this off, we are essentially turning off donated information from something like an AWACS. Let's go back to the SA page here and just take a look at a little bit more of the symbology that we have. Notice we do have a TDC cursor on the SA page. If we go sensor select switch down or in the direction of where your SA page is currently located, mine's on the AMPCD, so it can go down. We can move this cursor around just like as with the radar. And if we hover over any of these contacts, we can get some more information about them. So for example, if I hover over this guy, I can see that he is at Mach 0.5 and is at 14,000 feet. And if I look down here, I've got additional information. I can see that he is a MiG-29 because I've actually NCTR'd this guy. I can see that he is at a bearing range and aspect to me of 332 for 24. And I can also see some other information here, his rough heading compared to my own. While I've got him hovered, we have another option that pops up here, PLID. This is Pilot Identification Mode. Now what this does is, let's say that I have a reasonably good idea that this guy is a hostile. Let's pretend for a moment that he was an unknown. And let's see if I can do it to this guy. Let's pretend for a moment that this guy is an unknown. We think he's a hostile. What we can do is we can manually set him to hostile. So if I click this button here, and then I click HOS for hostile, I've now completed his HAFU to be the full red diamond. And now, as far as my system is concerned, he is a hostile. So we do that to manually set contacts as either hostile or friendly. I could set him to a friendly if I wanted to. So now he is a friendly as far as my system is concerned, even though there's some conflicting information there. Or I could set him back to an unknown if I'd like. So that is the pilot identification mode. Now a little bit more symbology I want to talk about on the friendly contacts here. Let's go look at this guy over here. This guy over here, who's currently doing Mach 0.8 at 34,000 feet, roughly traveling in that direction, is the friendly AWACS that's in the area. Now we know he's an AWACS because if we look, and let me zoom in just a little bit more, that dot in the center of his circle denotes that he is an AWACS. Okay, that's really all that means, that he is a surveillance aircraft, he is an AWACS, he's providing friendly radar information to us. The dot on the side denotes that he is also donating his information to us. Okay, that's what those two dots mean. If we look at these friendly contacts up here, these are F-15s, friendly F-15s. They do not have the dot in the center because they are not surveillance aircraft, they are fighter aircraft, but they are donating what information they have to us because we can see that they have the donor dot on the side of their circle. That is what that dot means. Okay? One other thing I would like to take a look at on the SA page, we have a step function. And what this does, if I click it once, it essentially puts a permanent cursor over a target and gives us floating information. So that information that we had that was hovering for the target under cursor is now just displayed there permanently. And if we hit step again, we can switch between the targets. Switch in between. It'll cycle through friendlies after all of your hostiles. And if we move our TDC around, we can then take control again. That is the basics, real basics of the SA page. I can get a little bit more into the weeds with it, but for most of our purposes, we're not necessarily going to want to for now. We will expand upon this a little bit when I get into latent trackwell scan and MSI, which also are contributing to some of the information that we see on this page, but that will be its own video. So for now, I'll leave you with this. Get in the air and just familiarize yourself with some of the basic information that's shown here and here, and I'll see you guys for the next video. Take care.